Welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. I've done this video about 4 times and I cannot keep it under 25 minutes, so we're going to try one more time. I'm going to have to split it out. A conversation started based on an article. Well, it was started because of an article, but the basis became selfishness in Americans, which is what I need to talk about. But I need to explain the genesis first. The second video I do will be about the article itself and some of the other discussions involved. The article is Atlantic, so you know it's bad, and it's called Why Canada is Able to Do Things Better. And the subtitle, of course, is that most of the country understands that when it comes to government, you pay for what you get, and you get what you pay for. Well, Mr. Jonathan Kay, the author of this article, is a native Canadian, so you know, this is one of those call other countries a shithole type of articles, which means it's bad to begin with. It's also, it's a very bad article in general. It has mandatory Trump bashing, which ignores any reference to any of Trump's infrastructure proposals. It talks about not having major new airports in the United States since 1995, which requires fudging definitions and not talking about why you can't build new airports in certain environmental areas, or the fact that Canada still had more frontier 10 years ago than the U.S. had in 1920. It doesn't talk about a lot. It's very bad because it also refers to, this is the part where I'm just going to tell you how the article is not trustworthy to begin with. It says, Washington, D.C.'s semi-functional subway system feels like a World's Fair exhibit that someone forgot to close down. Now, the reason I use that as an example of how the article is just not trustworthy, how the article is just bad, is that the DC Metro is not a subway system. First of all, it's a light rail system that exists partially underground, but mostly above ground when you look at miles of track or area served. It serves an area in 2 states and the federal district, and it's actually rather extensive in terms of how far out it goes, because we're a fairly dispersed population, even in many of our urban centers, New York City being one of the exceptions that we'll talk about. And the DC Metro is primarily an intermodal system. This is important, okay? If you say it's a subway and it's actually light rail, I'm doing semantics games, even though it shows that you don't understand the difference. The thing is, the Metro is a functioning intermodal system. When you ignore the actual functioning bus system, one of the few that I've ever experienced that really functions, and that's 4 continents, 34 countries, 9 states that I've lived in long enough to actually have like driver's license, a lease, or registration to vote. I have some experience. A functioning bus system like the DC Metro's intermodal system is it's very rare. Also, in that intermodal system is specific pedestrian paths and specific bike paths, and park and rides. And it actually works very well, but it is an intermodal system. The DC Metro is not a subway system, and this article, by dismissing it as a semi-functional subway system, proves that it is wrong. It's just wrong, okay? Now, this spawned a conversation about socialism, selfishness in America, all sorts of things. A guy named TG came in when one of my friends, a friend of mine for the last several decades, had talked about how Americans just can't stand the touch of socialism. After I commented that we have too much instead of not enough. And the reason I said that has to do with how we treat socialism, how socialism interacts with an actual liberty-minded, individualist, high-trust society, and it doesn't interact very well with that. But he didn't get that point. I didn't explain it that way, and I will have to do so in the future. But my friend brought up Penn Station as an example of bad infrastructure, failing infrastructure, and no one wanting to fix it and everyone refusing. And, well, you know, the fix for Penn Station is to blow it up and make 7 commuter hubs for the New York metro area. Which isn't what anyone wants to hear. So, someone in the conversation whose initials, I'm just going to use initials and make them up as I go along, say TG. TG comes up and does not understand my point. When I talk about running Penn Station, the Americans don't like the socialist idea that it is the sole responsibility of the omnipresent federal government. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't really know what Penn Station is, does, or who runs it. He's from Massachusetts. No one is more provincial than a New Englander. No one. He lives far closer to it than I do, but he probably hasn't been in it as many times as I have. So, Penn Station is the largest commuter transportation hub, I think, in the Western Hemisphere. Certainly in the United States, North America, but I think that includes Europe. And that's actually a problem. That's a bug, not a feature. But he comes back and he says he's promoting a socialist viewpoint. And he comes back and says, well, it's not a regional commuter hub, because I called it one. It's interstate, and it's the major transportation hub for the rest of the nation, much of the nation. And he says this, like, he literally says, major transportation hub for much of the nation. It's not. Not even in commuter terms, but I'm talking commuter. He keeps saying transportation, like, I don't think he knows. I explained to him that he does not know what that means, but transportation means transportation. 10% of that, give or take, depending on how you calculate tonnage versus miles versus vehicles, 10% of that is people moving, okay? The vast, vast, vast majority of that is freight goods. Freight, goods, liquids. In fact, our second largest transportation mode is actually pipelines, which are much more environmentally friendly than other methods, but the environmentalists, whatever. And this is going to get too long anyway. So he goes off about major transportation hub. I keep trying to tell him that it's a metro. It's the New York Metro commuter hub. I will call it regional to be generous, but it is a metro hub. It's not the rest of the nation. It's not a major transportation hub for the rest of the nation. He turns this into an argument or a statement that I'm saying somehow that the federal government should not fund any interstate infrastructure, which I'm not saying at all. And I'm going to get into that later in a different video. This turns into an argument about selfishness. And my friend, and we go back and forth, he's actually been more conservative than I have in the past. Right now I am, despite some very socially libertarian tendencies, I'm much more conservative than him, in that I don't actually believe that we need to punish most of the population to provide another part of the population with free rights or something. Anyway, we go back and forth some, okay? So far we've survived these flip-flops for a couple of decades and still managed to talk to each other, which is a good thing. Now, he says, I talk about this, I say, I don't see Americans as being that selfish. He says, fundamentally, he sees two mindsets among American people that he experiences and talks to. There's a mindset that says, we all need this thing, we should all help to pay for this thing, and even if I don't need this thing, I'll need this other thing, and you need this thing, and well, whatever you need, I should pay for. That's not... I've never seen this to the degree to which he describes it, okay? Outside of a few very specifically weird Christian sects, I've never seen someone who really goes and says, oh, whatever, I should give everything I have away and trust that the government will provide? Sure, Oh, let's go with that. The government will provide whatever God you believe in, right? I've never seen that, but he says this is one side. And the other side is the mindset of, you want me to pay for something I don't use? Well, fuck you. But then, of course, you should pay for what I do use, because hypocrisy seems to be a necessary component of the argument. This is a kind of a general thing. You can't just make the argument, you then have to take the side that you think is bad and apply hypocrisy to them and remove it from the side that you think is good. Now, this is the meat, okay? I've never seen it. I've never seen it happen that way. Most conservatives that I know are in favor of infrastructure spending. Most conservatives I know how much they pay in taxes, at least roughly. They can tell you numbers. They know how to look it up. They can generate a notebook for you of how much they've paid in taxes this year. State, local, county, property, everything. They know what they're paying. They know what they're getting. They know what government waste is. They know approximately, like ballpark, how much government waste there is and how much, like, the different fields of spending are. Vast majority of liberals and progressives cannot do that, and if you ask them, they go for some weird-ass Fox statistics article that they find that speaks to them and uses made-up numbers. Majority of conservatives I know, and I'm not counting libertarians, majority of conservatives I know are in favor of infrastructure spending. They want it done in a certain way. They want it done right. They want it done without a whole bunch of Green New Deal crap thrown in it, okay? But they do want it. In fact, President Trump has a $2 trillion multi-year, multi-decade plan that Congress won't touch because he's a Republican and they're Democrats, and so therefore it's evil, even though the proposal itself draws on 40 years of bipartisan, both sides, proposals and thoughts. Like, it's an economic plan, not a political plan, which of course means the politicians hate it. Never seen that selfishness from the conservatives. I've never seen the liberal who's willing to really go all out on that. I'll pay for anything you want. You decide what you want. They'll have somebody pay for what they decide you want, but that's a different thing and very progressive. A better example of this is to get at selfishness from a personal perspective. I have never had a conservative, well, not never. I've run into some authoritarian right-wingers, mostly like very extreme oddball religious sects, a couple of Seventh-day Adventist extremists, a couple of Foursquare Brethren, a couple of non-denominational Speaks to God churches, and a couple, anarcho-capitalists, and a couple of those. I've run into a couple, very few people on the conservative or right sphere who will tell you, no, don't be here, I don't want you here, I don't want you to do anything, I will not help you, whatever. But progressives, liberals, socialists, all three, all the combinations, they're bad. Talk about selfish, okay? I have had people tell me to leave cafes, restaurants, bars, even a library, because my presence or my opinions or my attitude was offensive or detrimental or whatever. Even if I'm not saying anything. I've had places where I walked in and they just knew that I had political views that they didn't like, okay? That is liberal, progressive, socialist. That is socialist, specifically, especially, okay? Never had that problem with conservatives. I've never seen that with the vast majority of conservatives. If I need help, if I need someone to accept who I am, they're more than likely going to be conservative, okay? It is much easier for me to get along with a conservative who disagrees with my lifestyle, but just says, hey, whatever. Don't put it in my face. I won't put mine in your face. We can go have a beer. Progressives don't do that at all. Okay? They do not accept that at all. And that intolerance, that right there, that's a symbol of selfishness. Okay? That and NIMBY provincialism. There is nothing so provincial as a progressive. An urban progressive, especially, perhaps, New England urban progressives. Look at the mayor of Seattle, okay? She was willing to let people be shot and die in Seattle for this Chaz Chop Raz's authoritarian commune thing until they went to her backyard. The moment she saw them, her backyard, she shut them down. But she was willing to let teenage boys get shot and killed and do nothing until they got to her backyard. Not in my backyard. NIMBY. Provincialism. It's a progressive trait. It's not a conservative trait. You might want to take that home and think about it a little. Have a good one.